Meggan Watterson, thank you for saying yes. Thank you for your spontaneity. Thank you for being on Why Isn't Everyone Doing This? Thank you for writing a book that I've just recently finished, and here you are in my life like magic. And thank you for the new body of work that you've written, The Girl Who Baptized Herself, which we're going to talk about, which I'm really excited to learn about. But I really want to start with Mary Magdalene Revealed, which is a book that I know that you've spent so much of your life studying, researching, and I don't know that many people know about Mary Magdalene other than how she's often depicted in the church, and certainly in America, but often in the West, as a whore. And it was news to me when I started hearing all these channeled texts, when I started learning of friends who had read your book, and that there's so much more to this extraordinary woman. And I have to say that for myself, I grew up Southern Baptist in Tallahassee, Florida, with dudes in khaki suits, sweaty men yelling from the pulpit, telling me what I shouldn't do with my body. And I was like, wait a minute, this does not feel like it to me. I don't know what it is, but I'm pretty sure it's not this. Right. And when I was 5 years old, I asked my mom, I was like, hey, how do we know we're Baptist? Like, were we born Baptist? Did we choose it? And she, at 5, she let me go and visit other churches. Like, I got to go to the Jewish temple. I got to go to the Church of Latter-day Saints. I got to go check out Catholicism. There's a lot of flavors of Christianity. Yeah. But I got to see at a pretty young age that I developed this analogy, which I think that God is a disco ball. And so it's like we're all looking at the same thing, but seeing different fractals of the divine. Right. And I think that the iconography really matters. And so I think that the removal of the divine feminine from our iconography has changed the way that everyone views divinity, but certainly women, because it's hard to be something if you can't see something.
It's like we're a cyclops looking at the divine. And
like, what does that mean?
Well, like one eye, a cyclops.
Like a monotheistic.
Right, and with only images of the divine, or just this idea of God the Father. And with these texts now that we have that were buried, by the 4th century, including the Gospel of Mary.
Like actually buried? Buried. In Egypt, yes?
In Egypt, in the sands, and stuck into urns and then buried in caves. But we have all of these texts now, so it's like in our lifetime, that other eye might open for us to perceive the divine. Okay, so
like in Egypt, there's the Eye of Horus, right? Which is but the beautiful thing about the Eye of Horus, which is the Egyptian eye we see, it's both the right and the left. It is the masculine and the feminine.
Exactly.
But this cyclops that you're talking about, this monotheistic, sort of patriarchal dogmatic, is not the Eye of Horus.
It's not
It's not the duality.
Vision, no.
And I once, someone on the podcast said that a half-truth is a lie. And so if we've removed half of the truth about divinity, then ultimately many of us have been living a version of a lie. So I'm curious, like, how did you first get inspired to study Mary Magdalene to the degree to which you did?
I would say it's very similar to your experience, this incredibly visceral knowing of not this. When I I was raised feminist, not Christian. So my mom didn't know really what to do with me, and she let me go to this very liberal Unitarian church, to just sort of like...
Because you were curious?
Because I couldn't stop talking about, like, why the hell are we here?
On the planet?
Yeah.
Why do we incarnate?
What are we doing?
Okay.
I couldn't stop talking about God and love and what happens and, where were we before we were born? All these questions. And
At what age?
Oh, just... from talking. It was just my obsession.
Where did you grow
up? Cleveland, Ohio. So she didn't know what to do with me. She had me go to this Unitarian church, and I had this incredibly physical, visceral reaction to reading the Bible. It just was not this.
Like a repulsion or visceral how?
I was covered in hives, and I was like shaking, and I had this conversation with the poor Sunday school teacher who was like in Birkenstocks and socks, and he just was really overwhelmed by my passion. And I recently found out that I have a stellium in Scorpio, so it kind of explains a lot. I never knew that.
Can you tell us what that means?
It's just I'm not that much into astrology, but all of my planets, all 5 of like the major planets, all in Scorpio. So it's just incredibly intense.
I'm like 8 in Aries.
Okay. So, there we go.
Intense.
Yeah. So intensity. And I just had to understand where were the women. Not just where they're being talked about or there's stories about women, but where are the women's stories? Like, where are the voices of women? And so it was deeply upsetting to me to see that. And I felt this level of fear, like, oh shit, this is what the majority of the major 3 world religions believes, is this understanding of God the Father and the Father only, and that this gives some sort of, holy decree for an exclusively male succession of divine authority going all the way back to Christ. And I just thought, fuck. Like,
not on my watch.
Yeah, like I just viscerally knew there was more to the story. But at that time, it was just overwhelmed. And then I spent many years studying world religions because I couldn't get close to Christianity yet. I needed to take a step back. And that's when I did all the research about the divine feminine and other world religions, just to sort of fortify me. And I think to sort of prepare myself for looking for the divine feminine within Christianity. So I did a theological degree focusing on the erasure, really, of the divine feminine in the world religions. And then I did
at Harvard, yes?
Yeah. And then I did I went to seminary to get a master's of divinity to figure out, okay, where and how and why were the voices of women erased from Christian history.
And so can you give us the Cliffs Notes on that, of why were the feminine voices erased from Christian history?
I mean, it's not a mystery. We see it every day today. It's the exact same. It's that how would the church forming in the 4th century justify an exclusively male succession of divine authority if there were all of these women with spiritual authority before it, right? The church didn't officially form until the 4th century. The documents that we have that form the New Testament all exist before the 4th century. They're 1st, 2nd, 3rd century texts. And the Gospel of Mary, for example, is a 2nd century text. So it's as old as any of the scripture that's codified in the New Testament. But Mary's Gospel has Mary as not a prostitute, but as a deliberate, chosen disciple of Christ who he gives secret metaphysical teachings to, because she was the one who could perceive him from within.
And do you believe that they were in a romantic relationship, that they were lovers?
So I get this written into me all the time. There's no reason why they wouldn't be. Like, the idea that Christ was only divine didn't happen until centuries later.
That he was God and man, human and divine.
He was both.
Yeah.
He was fully both according to the Gospel of Mary. That's what there's this phrase that repeats itself in the Gospel of Mary, true human being. But that word is translated from the Greek, anthropos. And anthropos means both, fully human, fully divine. I suck at math, like I am desperately challenged at math, but I understood that. What it means, like 100%, 100%, is that it's not like when you are doing something, when you're following the ego, right? Like, so when you're being more human, then you're suddenly not divine anymore. You're both and always, at all times. So, and when you are fully in your soul, you're fully in your soul because you have this body, because you are fully human. So it's both. And it's hard for us to really grasp that, but I think many of us have experienced it. This experience of being both fully human, fully divine, the true human being. Yeah.
Well, arguably that's why we incarnated, right? That the divine wanted to experience
it's the whole point. It's the whole
in
point.
The body.
It's the whole point. We don't want to deny the body. We don't want to try to transcend the body or bypass all of these emotions we get to feel, all of these sensations we get to have. It's the whole point. The practice that's really illuminated in the Gospel of Mary is this practice of becoming conscious, aware when we are over-identifying with the ego. So when she talks about 4 powers that Christ illuminated for her, so she understood how to clarify the heart, to receive him, to see visions of him.
Of Christ or God? Of
Christ, of the divine as well, like of...
But why did she need to see visions of him if she was with him?
To prepare for after, when he no longer was. physically present. So he could continue to come to her after he died.
Okay.
From within.
Uh-huh.
So
like the embodiment of Christ consciousness, which is arguably what we're interested in on the planet.
Right. And it's ultimately to become a mediator between the worlds, where you can perceive even those who have passed. Like, to me, that's what that message is. Love never dies, love never ends. That's because that love that they experienced between them, to get back to like what kind of relationship I think they had, whatever it was their human love that bound them. It was that love between them that transcends the physical body. So even as Christ's body perished, that connection between them didn't die, never ended. And that's what I believe the Gospel of Mary was meant to teach all of us, is to give us that awareness of how we perceive from within. The word that Christ refers to, chapter 7 is when he talks about vision, which is so powerful.
Chapter 7 of your book?
Of the Gospel of Mary.
Okay.
She's like, so Lord, I saw you today in a vision. And then Christ says, blessed are you who did not waver at seeing me, for where the mind is, there is the treasure. First of all, he uses like a blessed are, which I love, because that tethers this scripture to all the other scriptures that were codified in the New Testament in the 4th century, right? Like, he's speaking like Christ. Blessed are you for not wavering at seeing me, for where the mind is, there is the treasure. Now, that word mind isn't our modern concept of mind as in like esoteric thought or intellectual. That word is a very, very fascinating word that the theological geek in me went absolutely, I just obsessed over this word. It's new, N-O-U-S. And it's a very, very fascinating word.
N-O-U-S.
N-O-U-S, new. And what that means, when you translate it more directly, is the spiritual eye of the heart.
The spiritual eye of the
So
heart.
where the spiritual eye of the heart is, there is the treasure. And then I just, followed that red thread all during seminary of the new. And I found a group of crazy, amazing desert fathers. They're really mystics.
What's a desert father?
Well, they were these hesychists that just...
What's a hesychist?
So I was so obsessed with them. It's where the phrase navel gazing comes from.
Oh.
They literally curled forward over their hearts, and their whole focus in their meditation was to bring all of their consciousness into the heart. But what's so fascinating about the hesychist, whose writings date back to...
Can we get like a century, a country?
Okay, so they at least started writing, and they may have existed before this, but by the 4th century, Egypt.
Oh.
So, yeah,
It all comes back to Egypt.
And so hesychist, that word Hezekiah in Greek is stillness, silence.
Okay.
So what they wanted to do was to get still within the heart in order to perceive, right? Because they wanted to clarify the different, this is where the ideas of vices, which later became the 7 deadly sins, but originally it was a hesychist, John Cassian, who had 8 vices that he came up with for his community of monastics, and the idea was to clarify the heart. So there was like a purification stage, and then we can get to the stage where we're in constant dialogue with the divine. But what's so interesting is that John Cassian, there's no mention, like you can't find a theological bridge between the Gospel of Mary, where Christ is giving Mary Magdalene these 7 powers, the awareness of these 7 powers to clarify her heart, to be able to see him. You can't find a theological thread that gives Mary credit for that, the Gospel of Mary. But then John Cassian's talking about these 8 vices, and they sound hauntingly familiar to the 7, powers in the Gospel of Mary. And then where does he go when he leaves Egypt to bring his studies to the West? He goes to France, and he's the one who consecrated Mary Magdalene's cave in the south of France.
What does consecrating a cave mean?
No, it's like making it holy, even though it already was. It's stating it officially within the church. So,
Okay.
you know, it's typically...
Have you ever had a moment where nature just drops the exact message you need exactly when you need it? Maybe it's a reminder to slow down. Maybe it's a fresh perspective on something you've been stuck on, or just the perfect nudge to help you embody your highest self. Well, that is what I want to give you every single week, a dose of Ziva straight from my heart to yours. When you sign up for my emails, you're going to get first access to the downloads that are coming straight into my heart, access to science-backed tools to help you stress less and feel more alive. You're going to get a sneak peek into my personal practice and all the perks that we only share with our Ziva insiders. You're going to get podcast announcement and exclusive offers and invitation to our events before anyone else. And because I love a good thank you gift, if you sign up right now, you're going to get a special welcome gift just for signing up, and it's totally free. It just might be the very best thing you do for yourself today. So you can go to the link in the show notes or go to zivameditation.com/whythis to get a beautiful welcome gift and to receive these transmissions from my heart to yours every single week. So head to zivameditation.com/whythis, and I will see you in your inbox. So I'm feeling the need to just like back it up a little bit, just in case people are like, what are we talking about? Who is Mary Magdalene? What century? What is the, I'm Jewish. I don't care about Mary Magdalene. Right. Like just to like contextualize. And so I'll just share a little bit of my story and how I learned. And then I want to go to Egypt.
Okay, great.
So I grew up, like I said, Southern Baptist. I only knew of Mary Magdalene as like a whore that Jesus met by the well.
The penitent prostitute.
And then like Jesus was such a good guy because he was taking such good care of this prostitute.
He was like, oh, I'll take you in.
Yeah. And so it blew my mind when I had an ex-partner and he used to read the Magdalene manuscripts to me at night, every night for 10 months.
Wow. Oh,
I was living with my ex-husband. We were going through a divorce and we were sharing a wall. Wow. And so I would have my headphones in, and every night to sleep, my partner Adam would read me the Magdalene manuscript. So I couldn't tell you what they say in my mind, but like the codes got installed in my body. And then she just started showing up all over the place. Yep. And then earlier this year, I did a Rose Dieta, and then here we are. Like so it's fascinating how you can just sort of like invoke these different states of consciousness. Yep. So anyway, what blew my mind when I read the Magdalene manuscripts was which is a channeled text by Tom Kenyon, and you can please feel free to like, let me know what's here is conspiracy theory or what is just total made up nonsense. Because a channeled text, there's no historical reference for it. It's just like someone intuited that this is the truth. But what I know about the Magdalene manuscripts is that it's been a real initiation, that it actually awakens people en masse. And so in it, from what I remember, which is not much, it's more of a gnosis really, but that Mary Magdalene was actually a student of, a high priestess in the lineage of Isis, and so was Mother Mary. Is that accurate? Is that true?
I mean, there's no way on an academic level to verify any of that, because there would be nothing, that would have survived. But if we look at the Isis cults, and we think about...
for those, Isis is the Egyptian goddess of motherhood, of fertility, of sexuality, of magic, and what I like to think, and I don't know if this is true, but if Jesus and Mary Magdalene were studying in India and in Egypt, right, that they were getting these codes of like what these monks can do, like breatharians, aeritarians can survive on air. They can take their metabolic rate down very, very low for days, sometimes weeks on end. They can use the Kundalini energy of the life force energy to resurrect or to bring themselves back to life.
Right. Isis has a pretty incredible resurrection story that came long before Christ. So there's a lot of those ties as well, the story of the resurrecting, and the fact that Mary anoints him is really significant. Again, that ties her to the cult of Isis, because that was a part of their priests and priestesses, was the anointing, healing anointing oils. And it was the holiest moment of any ritual, because it marked the transition that you were making. You were dying. You were crossing a threshold.
The anointing happened before death.
Right.
And Mary Magdalene anointed Jesus or Yeshua.
Right. But the deaths were also metaphoric, which is something, unfortunately, we've lost in this, time, is the idea that we have to die again and again and again in order to be truly alive. So anointing can also mean...
Do you mean like die a version of you? Like
an egoic death.
Ego death,
Exactly.
a death portal.
Exactly.
So one lifetime, but I'm transitioning from being a mother to
Right.
or a wife to a widow, or
Exactly.
a maiden to a mother.
And really, really taking that sacred moment to recognize that that person no longer exists, who you once were. And what's so fascinating is some of these other scriptures that were recovered when the Acts of Paul and Thekla and the Gospel of Mary were found are scriptures like the Gospel of Philip, which says, you can say nothing outside this body. You must awaken while in this body because everything exists in it. Resurrect in this life. So that's a very different understanding of resurrection, right? That's knowing that we need to perpetually die to who we used to be and resurrect in this life, becoming more and more the soul that we are, right? At the heart of us. And really allowing those stories, those egoic ties that bind us, go. And having that ritual to really mark, okay, I have died to who I used to be.
So this seems huge, because if you believe that, like, you know, religion is the opiate of the masses, or religion en masse is used to control populations, then Christianity is a perfect one for it, because it's like, it's the ultimate I'll be happy when syndrome, right? Like, I'm willing to suffer in this lifetime for the perceived payoff in the future, which so many of us are living in our own, like, religion of capitalism. I'm willing to, like, suffer right now because I will have money in the future.
Once I reach some place, ransoming your current joy. Yeah.
Right, and I think that this is oftentimes... It can make us really sick, because then we're avoiding the emotions, avoiding the body, avoiding the now.
Yep.
And what we were talking about earlier, what you mentioned is like the hero's journey is external.
Right.
But the heroine's journey is internal.
Right.
Right? The divine masculine is like, what can I accomplish and achieve out here? The divine feminine is, what can I heal and integrate inside, in the body, in our emotions? And one is neither female nor male. We all have the masculine and the feminine.
And we all need to do both pilgrimages.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but it's very hard to do a proper, full external pilgrimage if we are avoiding feeling our feelings, avoiding our sexuality, thinking that our bodies are a sin, thinking that our desires are a sin, thinking that the very same bliss chemicals that God has installed inside of us somehow make us unworthy of the love of God that gave them to us. Right. And so that's why I'm so passionate about, you know, like, not one or the other, not male or female, not feminine or masculine.
Both
but when you look at the human body, and especially when you release DMT in the brain, that God chemical that gets released in the brain happens when you union the pineal and the pituitary, which is the masculine and feminine inside of the marriage hall, inside of the brain.
Holy of holies.
And that's why I think it's so fascinating. Like, why on earth would we want to remove the divine feminine? Because then we're robbing ourselves of being able to actually reach these God consciousness states inside of our own bodies.
And fully existing. Yeah.
And so, can you tell us a little bit about, like, you know, apparently there's like 3 years missing in the Bible, right? Where like we don't really know where Jesus and Mary Magdalene were, but supposedly, and maybe you have, I'm not a historian, so thank you for helping. But like, were they in Egypt? Were they in India? Do we know?
Again, there's nothing that can academically verify. See, the brain wants to empirically know things, you know, and the ego wants to say this happened. And what I've learned through the years is being both a scholar and a practitioner of this work is that everything is always yes, no, and maybe. And it sucks. It sucks. Like, I feel like Nicolas Cage with Cher slapping me, you know, like when he's like, I love you, and she's like,
like, wait, same word. Why is that? Why do you feel like that? I don't know.
Moonstruck. Oh, because it's like every time I want to know. Yes, this happened.
This is the truth.
This is it.
This
like
is the verifiable.
Oh my God! So many times I was like, okay, well, so if we have this scripture and we have this scripture, we have all this saying this, then of course Christ was so much more the liberator, not like this, like, you know, judgmental man who wanted to tell women what they can do and not do with their bodies. Like, that came hundreds of years later. The scripture is like pointing me towards this truth, that the truth that I really feel within me, you know, and I always wanted validation that yes, empirically, yes, this is true. And you just have to hold something so much wider, so much, like, it's very frustrating, it pisses me off, but like we can't, it's the mystery, you know, we really have to sit in the mystery of it, and we have to believe in and trust in Gnosis, which is so much a part of all of those scriptures. They're referred to as the Gnostic Gospels. And the reason for that is because they focus on all of our capacity to know from the Greek gnosis. But these scriptures, which it's really important to point out, these scriptures are not evidence of some separate tradition, right? Like of these Gnostics that were separate from the early Christians. This was evidence of a story about Christ that didn't win out, right? A story about how to perceive Christ from within, how to perceive what's true for us, how to know in our body.
Like our own personal discernment.
Our own personal discernment of what's right for us, rather than somebody saying, you know, oh, come over here and I will teach you about how to, you know, find the divine, or come over here and surrender to me. And this is very much a balm and a salve to all of that, that paradigm where we had to hand our power over to someone that we saw as somehow holier than us. This is the opposite.
And is that the theme of the Gnostic Gospels? Is that why they were all removed from?
Yeah, it's really, well, and
Bible?
they include Mary Magdalene in many of them. So, you know, she...
In the Gnostic Gospels.
Yeah, in the Gospel of Mary, and she comes up as well in the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Philip. And so they were all removed in order to be destroyed. But also...
Because it was like highlighting the democratization of God, that everyone has their own direct access.
Exactly. And that was what was so dangerous when in the 4th century, really the patriarchy wanted to deify the idea that the God is the father and that there is a reason to have this exclusively male succession of divine authority.
Can we talk about Mother Mary for a second? And then I really want to go into your new book, which is The Girl Who Baptized Herself, which is the Gospels of Thekla and Paul.
The Acts of Paul and Thekla, yep.
Acts of Paul and Thekla. So, what do we not know about Mother Mary that you feel like should be in the zeitgeist?
So if you have ever thought, I am ready for more out of life, more energy, better sleep, deeper human connection, or simply the ability to handle stress like a total boss, then Ziva is for you. So at Ziva, we combine modern science with ancient wisdom to create tools that actually work. Because stress is costing you much more than you realize. It can steal your focus, drain your energy, and keep you from showing up as the human that you know you're meant to be. That's why over 60,000 high performers, CEOs, athletes, parents have turned to Ziva. Our programs don't just teach you skills, they help you master your life. They help you embody your highest potential. So whether you're brand new to this or ready to take your life and your practice to the next level, the best place to start would be Ziva meditation. So in just 15 minutes a day for 15 days, you're gonna learn a practice that will remove stress from your body and transform the way you feel and function every single day. And right now, I'm gonna give you a gift, 15% off, which you can use at checkout by entering the code WHYTHIS. So all you need to do is go to zivameditation.com, find the course that is right for you, because I'm so excited to share these tools with you. I've dedicated my whole life to refining these practices and making them as fun, attractive, and accessible as possible. So go to zivameditation.com and enter the code WHYTHIS on the course that feels right for you, and I will see you inside.
What do we not know about Mother Mary that you feel like should be in the zeitgeist?
Well, I feel like it's very important to understand that she did not become immaculate and virginal until hundreds and hundreds of years after she was alive. So I just think it's...
She wasn't portrayed as a virgin until hundreds of years after she died.
And that was...
Retroactive virginity.
Posthumous virginity. Divinity by a very elite group of men decided this, that she no longer, like, her vagina contained no magic, you know, and that she had
the
never...
only one.
Yeah. And she was also conceived virginally, so she was like virgin twice over.
Anna was her mother.
Yes.
Okay.
So, and what that did, which is so profound and has effects even today, is it stripped women of the power and the absolute divine moment, that threshold that many of us have crossed when we give birth, something that our bodies more closely mimic the divine power to give life, but that stripped us of the ability to see it as sacred, right? Like
giving birth.
Yeah, if the Virgin Mary, she's the one who is, uplifted. So then it stripped her of that human moment of giving birth to Christ and having created him. And it also set up this very, pervasive dualism that exists today, where Mary became the ultimate uber virgin and Mary Magdalene became the prostitute. So there's the virgin whore dichotomy that lives inside so many women even today, where it's like they think they're somehow more holy if they don't encounter, the erotic within themselves, or they don't go to other realms like in sex through their bodies, then somehow they're more pure, more closer to the divine. And that's something that women today still have to heal.
I think
and
all
work
of us
through.
do. I think
Yeah.
all genders do.
Yeah.
And it seems to me very similar to what's happened to psychedelics, right? Except like if you take psychedelics and you have your own visceral experience of the divine, and you can get that same internal gnosis experience of the divine through your internal pharmacology with sacred sexuality, I think it's been the same level of suppression, the same level of no, don't plug in directly, come through me, and then I'll pay 10% and I'll show you the way to God. So I think that all genders are suffering. I live up in the woods now, and I came into the city, and I was going to a podcast studio, and I walked into a church, and there was people in there meditating or praying, and I love a temple space, so I walked in, and I was looking around, and it was beautiful, giant crucifix. Jesus is on there, and it was the church of the Virgin Mother Mary. And I was like, oh, this is a temple to celibacy and suffering. No wonder we're fucked up. I was like, we built all these temples to celibacy and suffering.
Well, it's that dichotomy, that duality, that the body is somehow less than the soul. And that has done such a disservice to all of us. The soul wouldn't be here if not for the body.
Yeah. So when you say you're both an academic and a practitioner, what does your practice look like?
So when I was studying these hesychasts, I became absolutely obsessed with their practice. They practiced the prayer of the heart, and ultimately what they did was they harnessed all of their consciousness into the heart, and then they chanted inside their hearts the prayer of the heart, Kyrie eleison in Greek. And so they were chanting that again and again and again and again. And so I started that practice, and I noticed that the word mercy within the chant was really creating a powerful shift within me, and also bringing all of my consciousness into the heart. But I wanted to be able to do this practice all the time, not just sort of in a meditative posture, not just secluded, right? Because these hesychasts were separated. They were, outside the normal realm of everyday living. And
they were sort of like monks. That was their practice. They were in devotion all the time.
Yeah, and I wanted to be able to practice this. I was in New York City. I was a single mom and wanting to write. And so I wanted to practice this, whether I was changing my son's diapers or traveling on the subway, or I wanted to always be in this state of returning to the heart. So I created a meditation called the Soul Voice Meditation based on that hesychast prayer.
Can you give us a little sneak peek of it? Or do you want to lead us through it?
It's essentially 3 breaths. You just set your intention for 3 breaths. And the idea is that you're just going back into the heart to connect with it, and as Mary's gospel directs, to bring your consciousness there to be able to see more with the eye of the heart. And then you just surface again, and you can do those 3 intentional breaths with your eyes open. Like, no one needs to know you're doing it. It's like Kegels, like you can be having actually a horrible conversation, and you can do it, And it helps the conversation go to a different place because you're reconnecting to what's really true for you, right? You're not reacting from the ego, you're returning to the heart and trying to see a new way through.
So I'm curious, because I mean, you've really changed a lot of people's lives through your book, Mary Magdalene Revealed. I remember I was at a party maybe 9 years ago, and all these people were talking about it. I was kind of like, they're crazy. What are they talking about? Some like pieces of the Bible that went missing, and now they've been recovered, and like feminine. Like I couldn't hear it then. I wasn't ready to receive it then. But I just want to really celebrate like how much you've changed culture in the zeitgeist through your dedication and through your creativity. And I'm so curious, like, what has had you transition? I know you've recently become fully sober. So I'm curious about that and how your personal journey inspired you to move into this new world of this new book, The Girl Who Baptized Herself. So can you give us a Cliff's Notes? I had never heard of Thekla before. I don't know much about Paul.
Most people have not heard of Thekla, but so that, I would say the pearl that stayed with me after writing Mary Magdalene Revealed and going to her cave, specifically her cave of eggs.
In France.
There was this realization that what Christ is really teaching her in the Gospel of Mary is that further up is really farther in. So
like further up the spiritual ascension.
Yeah, when we think of ascension, when we think of ascension, I think a lot of people are thinking, up and out of the body and hovering somewhere way up there. And there's all these depictions of Mary being transported by these 4 angels up to the cliff tops in the south of France. And what my sense of that is that further up was actually farther in, and that's the true ascension, is going deep, deep, deep into the vision of the heart. And so I was carrying that with me when the world stood still in 2020. And
it's a really nice way of saying that.
Yeah.
When the world stood still in 2020.
Yeah. I mean, I got to become, the hesychist I always wanted to be, right? They love stillness and silence. And so I just started really practicing daily and studying the Acts of Paul and Thekla. And the reason for that was that the template that I became conscious of as I was reading it, it's just 45 short chapters. And again, this is one of the many scriptures that was recovered. It had been buried when these scriptures were ordered to be destroyed in the 4th century, but it was found in 1945.
Who were they ordered to be destroyed by?
So that was when the church was formally creating under Constantine in the 4th century.
Okay.
Ultimately, when they were deciding, okay, this is orthodoxy, these are the official texts, and now these texts over here that talk about finding the divine within and have all of these women in positions of spiritual authority, we're going to say that these texts are now officially apocrypha, which means of doubtful authenticity.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. Like the sacred feminine was not forgotten.
Was doubted.
It was removed.
Wasn't believed.
The pages were ripped out. The tablets were etched there. This was very purposeful.
So that moment then created really a new story about Christ. This was a new story, and that one was erased. And so when I began to, really delve into the 45 chapters in the Acts of Paul and Thekla. Thekla is this young teen in the 1st century, one of the disciples of Christ. He's one of the earliest followers of Christ. Paul the Apostle, everyone has heard of him.
Paul's in the Bible, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Which, this is what's so significant, is like, can we really know Paul without knowing who Paul was to Thekla?
I don't know anything about Thekla.
Well, so her story isn't included in the New Testament specifically because she ends up baptizing herself, which was like, when I came across this text, I just immediately identified with her and just had to understand, okay, what is her story about? And what I began to see was that this is a template of going inward, really. That there are 7 stages in her transformation. She starts off in this little red brick house, and her fiance and her mom, like she's expected to marry, right? And she's expected to become a mother. And she overhears Paul talking about Christ, and he refers to him as the beloved. And by the end of her story, she's in this arena, and she has like inspired this whole arena of women to stand up and throw cardamom and rose petals and spices to lull the wild animals that were meant to kill her. And the women all cried out in a loud voice as if from one mouth. And Thekla baptizes
she's in
herself.
A stadium to be murdered?
To be murdered.
And the women are protecting her with rose petals and cardamom.
And the women are the ones in society, in Roman society, that have the least amount of power. They are considered property. So her story is really a path of how do we ascend in this lifetime from powerlessness to power. How do we go from a life of having no choices and no personal agency to really being able to follow the dictates of our own soul?
This is so fascinating, because just this morning I interviewed our dear mutual friend Kate Northrup, and she teaches nervous system regulation around money.
Right.
And what we were saying is that if you are triggered, which is what happens if we don't feel our feelings, right? If we don't actually face the trauma that most of us have had as children, and we're in an involuntary fight or flight trauma response, then we have no agency.
Right.
And if we have no agency, we have no power.
Right.
And so while we've been trained that to feel our feelings is weak, we're going to be a pansy, which is a euphemism for female genitalia.
Right.
That if I feel my feelings, that's somehow less than weak, and yet the very feeling of the feelings is the thing that liberates us, that gives us agency, which gives us power.
Right.
And so I could not love this story more. That this divine feminine journey of going into the body
and farther
is
up
the liberation.
Right. Further in is farther up, and so. It echoed the Gospel of Mary, this ascendancy to power. What does Thekla do when she wants to change her circumstances? She sits still for 3 days and 3 nights.
I can really take a few notes there.
Right?
Not so good at stillness. So at what point in her journey did she sit still for 3 days?
At the very beginning. That's how her whole transformation begins, is by refusing to engage in the world that she was expected to live in.
She didn't want to get married. She didn't want to be a mom.
She didn't want to get married. She didn't want to be a mom. She didn't want to do what her mother was telling her she had to do, right? Her patriarchal mother, telling her her worth was tethered to her becoming a bride.
How do you have a patriarchal mother?
No. What?
How do you have a patriarchal mother?
A mother who wants you to fit into
the society that you're living in.
Expected norms. Get married, allow us to use you as a form of barter to, gain power and prominence, and Thekla refuses. And so...
This might be too much of a spoiler, but
what?
How does she baptize herself? Or do we have to get the book?
It's great. I mean, she is in the arena, and there's this pool of water where there's sea lions, wild
Same arena where they're trying to kill her?
Yeah. She uses it, right? She's resourceful. And she takes.
Why were there sea lions? Was that a circus?
This is one of the many ways that they like to kill people, was by throwing them in pits of water with wild sea lions.
What?
So she jumps in and baptizes herself. She says, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I baptize myself." And I mean, you just think about how powerfully radical that is. Earlier, she asked Paul to baptize her, and he's like, not yet, I'm
all set.
Which is so familiar to me. It's okay, I see you, I see that you have some power, but let's wait for you to prove yourself a little bit more, right? And Thekla's to hell with this. This is between me and my own understanding of what is meant to come through me. I'm going to baptize myself. And that original word, salvation, how it meant in the context of the first, several centuries, was simply to be made more alive.
Ooh,
it wasn't.
Just say that again. Yeah. Salvation is to be made more alive.
And it wasn't something that happened outside of us. It was something that we created from within us. So it only began hundreds of years later that the church were these gatekeepers, to saving us, to us having to prove we're worthy in a way. And this text is really, again, like going back to that opening the other eye with which we can see what it means, you know, to experience the divine. This is something we haven't ever really considered before, is the way that we are responsible for our own aliveness. We are responsible for clearing our hearts, you know, for the idea usually often is that we give our power over to this external idea of the divine that then comes and when we're deemed worthy saves us. And this is a completely different understand that we're actively working at that within us. And that's where it ultimately arrives in the heart.
I have this, I don't know if it's a theory or a question, but you know, right now there's a particular style of therapy called IFS, or internal family systems.
Yes.
Where you get to like explore your own parts.
Yeah.
So there might be like a wounded child part,
Right.
or an angry part, or a sad part, or an abandoned part.
It's really profound.
And I've found it to be really profound.
Yeah.
It's so simple and really moves the needle in your consciousness, because
Yeah.
you get to, if you just say like, I am sad, then that's a little hard to swallow. But if like, oh, there's a part of me that's
Right.
sad. Like,
Right.
I am jealous is a
Right.
little hard and shameful to
Right.
admit. But then when there's a part of me that's jealous. So I found it to be really liberating to look at these different parts of myself. And when I look at almost every pantheon, there's multiple faces of the divine, right? There's many gods and goddesses in the Egyptian pantheon, many
Right.
gods and goddesses in the Greek pantheon, many gods and
Hindu.
goddesses in the Roman, Hindu,
Yeah.
like, and so I'm just curious, like, what happens to our psyche when we go into monotheism, when there's just like one image of God, and it's male, and it's judgmental, and it's separate from us, and it's looking at right, wrong, good, bad, you know, above, below. What happens in our own interpretation of our own divinity? How do we see our judgment, our shame, our sexuality, our sorrow? How do we find the sacredness inside of all of that? And I'm really curious to
Right.
see, as IFS is spreading in the zeitgeist really quickly, like, will that shift naturally the way that we view the divine?
I think the most crippling detriment to Thekla's erasure and Mary Magdalene's erasure is our inability to trust the voice we hear inside of us. That's the most devastating. You know, we doubt ourselves. We doubt we're even worthy of hearing a voice that might know what we want to do simply within us.
Yeah. There's a big philosophy in parenting, like RIE parenting, respectful parenting, where the goal is to do the best that you can. It's almost impossible, but the best that you can to invite your children to continue to be self-referral for their happiness, self-referral for their approval, versus always seeking approval out externally.
Right.
So it's like you're seeing like young hip moms now being like, they don't say good job anymore. You know, it's just like, oh, how did that feel?
Yeah.
Do you feel proud of yourself? You're like asking the child to check in on their own sense
Beautiful.
of worth.
Yeah.
And I think that like, you know, the whole Santa Claus is sort of like Christianity and capitalism had a baby, right? Where it's like there's this dude with a beard judging you if you're good or bad, and if you touch yourself, you're a sin, you're not going to get toys, you're not going to go to heaven later, so you better be good now. Versus like, wait, what do I think is good?
Right.
Am I proud of myself?
Right.
Did I do my best?
What do I want
Yeah.
in this life? Exactly.
So I'm curious if you would like to share any of your personal journey of what in you birthed this book, or what did this birth, shift, or change in you?
It really has to do with that idea of getting sober
And
that
what
you
does
mentioned.
sober mean?
Well, so in those stages that I recognized were a part of Thekla's journey in the Acts of Paul and Thekla, there's this fourth stage which is basically like, you know, that you can feel it. There's like something better, something more. Like maybe you've even tasted it or like experienced it, right? Like there's a new way.
Better or more than what?
Than how you're currently living, right? Like you experience this new way of being, like and you feel so electrified and you feel more alive. But like the fourth stage is like, you also know that it feels so much better to go back and like stay in the cages your ego has made you feel comfortable in, you know, you're like, oh, but it's so,
the nervous system will always calibrate to familiarity.
Exactly.
And even if it's better, if it's unfamiliar, it feels unsafe.
Exactly. So what's incredibly painful can feel like home.
Yeah. Especially with an abusive childhood.
So that's the fourth stage, is like you know, and you're aware, and you may have experienced like what this new way of being might be in the world if you shift, your energy and like really, really descend closer and closer, or allow your soul to ascend and really let go of who you used to be, but you scurry back to like the way that. So for me, I loved red wine, but it really wasn't about the red wine. The red wine was like a numbing. Mm-hmm. It kept me from feeling what I intuitively knew I had to go back and heal and feel. And my real addiction was with my ex-husband. It wasn't with the red wine. It was getting back together again and again with my ex-husband.
Well, you would break up and get back together and break up. And this is your son's father or something different? Okay.
And I felt powerless. Like when people talk about feeling powerless around alcohol, that's how I identified when he would want to try again. It felt impossible for me not to say yes.
What was charming about it?
Well, so it was really like an addiction in the sense that I was trying to heal through him what I really needed to heal myself, mm-hmm. From like an original trauma, like the first time I left my body. And what giving up the alcohol did is it allowed...
Left your body as a defense mechanism, not as a divine reunion.
Yes, a disassociation to survive. But so the wine was like numbing that knowing, and because it was so clear. I never forgot the first trauma. I never forgot it. I always saw it. It wasn't like something I repressed.
The first trauma also feels like a good title for a book.
Yeah, I know. It was like I just couldn't feel it. It was like there, like a movie I would watch, but I couldn't feel any feelings connected to it. Mm-hmm. And so when I got sober from the red wine, I then had this clarity, this capacity to be able to do much deeper work with a somatic therapist. Mm-hmm. And I went back to the original trauma, which was like, it was just this, one car ride with my dad when he was driving drunk, but he swerved out, around a truck when we were going around a curve. So I had no idea, what I was like 7 years old, So what I knew in my body was that he couldn't choose me over the wine. And so what I was reenacting in my never-ending marriage was this desire, right, to be chosen, like for him to choose me before anything and everything, and to become a love that stays, right, which he wasn't. And ultimately, once I went through this healing process, I understood that that's what I had to be for myself, of course, right?
You had to choose
like
yourself.
I had to be the one to never leave me.
Oof.
And to learn how to never abandon my body again,
Amen.
Yeah.
Let's just say a little prayer that we all find a way to really hold ourselves, to hold our inner children, to not abandon our bodies, to not abandon our feelings. And just really taking a moment to imagine 7.8 billion people learning to find and love their inner little ones, learning to feel their feelings, not as a way of reenacting trauma, but as a way of transcending and including the entirety of their life experience. Like just really feeling into what a different planet we will be living in.
Yeah, and it's the beauty of it is that healing isn't linear. So many people love that idea that it's linear. It's a nautilus. We circle back again and again, closer and closer to the wound itself. And it's like all along, we're accruing this love, this love that's strong enough to be able to reach it.
Like seeing the parts of ourselves that we deem to be unlovable and choosing to love them anyway.
Right, being that love. We've sought in people outside of us to love that, but then having that love come from within us that holds it, And
that's what I've heard, is that part of the reason of Yeshua or Jesus's union with Mary Magdalene was so powerful, is that they were both like the feminine and masculine embodiment
United.
of this Christ consciousness, this deep self-compassion, this deep acceptance of all of the sides of themselves and their ability to love the wholeness of themselves.
Human and
then
divine.
that thing together was the thing that changed the planet, not one or the other.
Right.
And I like to believe that. Maybe it's just the romantic in me,
but it also makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense. Of course it would include both.
Yeah.
Of course it would. Because that's what's true. I mean, we all feel that. So many people write into me and say, you reminded me of the Christ I knew before I went to church. And that's, I think, so important, because it's beginning to trust again what we experience is true, what we know is true in our bodies, and believing that enough to give voice to it.
So this is a really special day. One, I'm getting to meet you for the first time. You've quickly become a hero of mine. And two, this is our first live studio audience podcast for Why Isn't Everyone Doing This? So I'd love to take a few minutes and see if there are any questions from our live audience. And you can just call them out and then I'll say them, I'll repeat them.
Have no fear. Be not afraid.
So we just had a question from the audience. You said you were raised feminist.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Well, so my mom was raised by really my great-grandmother, so her grandmother, and she was a suffragette. And
I just learned that it was called the suffragists.
Yeah.
And the suffragette was like a way of minimizing them. So,
well, she liked to refer, she sort of thought that it was a sexier name.
Great, then well, she did it, so we will honor her desire. Suffragette.
She was so proud of that fact. Of course, they, were interested in the vote, but which is what they're known for. But they also were really interested in women earning money to be homemakers. And the idea behind that
was... The original universal basic income.
Yeah. Well, so that then they would have accrued wealth and their work would be valued by the wider world, of raising children, of providing all the needs of the home, but it also would give them personal agency. So say, for example, divorce, right? A lot of women then were stuck in positions where if they had an abusive husband or if their husband divorced them, and then they had nothing. Even after 20 years so she fought for that, and she really influenced my mother. This is
your grandmother.
This is my great-grandmother, my mom's grandmother. Was a Margaret, and then my mom was named after her, Margaret, and then I'm a Meggan, but my great-grandmother always called me Margaret. So I feel like I come from a long line of fierce feminist Margarets, and my mom just was always, she wasn't religious, she wasn't even really spiritual, she focused on the good in people, and the reason why that distinction is so important to me is that a lot of people think like if you're someone who has a thing for Christ, you wouldn't be a feminist. Like that'd be a paradox, right? To have a thing for Christ and to be a feminist. But actually it's not. It's actually like when you really study this early movement that these scriptures came out of, you understand that Christ was resisting the empire, not reinforcing the power structures of the empire. And this is, to me, what my exposure to feminism was really illuminating the unjust power structures in the world. And my mom was very much like an intersectional feminist. So her idea was that anyone and everyone deserves the same human rights, no matter who we are.
Which is like the ultimate core of Jesus's teachings,
right,
really.
Right. So it's just that later Christianity made those types of core beliefs, there began this idea that, homosexuality is sinful, that women, should be controlled, their bodies should be controlled, they should be, subservient, but those were all later ideas. The earliest ideas were about radical equality, and why it's so powerful that Christ gave Mary Magdalene in particular these teachings is because in the first century she would have been considered less than a man. Like in the Roman Empire, only a male body was considered like a full human being. The female body wasn't, and women had no rights. Like we couldn't hold office, we couldn't vote. So it was absolutely radical for Christ to have given Mary these teachings. Embedded in it, though, I think was one of the most sneaky and powerful teachings that Christ, it was like masterful, like kung fu, you know, because for the disciples to believe the teachings that Christ gave Mary, they would have had to heal their illusion and their ignorance that she's somehow less than them. But they couldn't, they didn't receive it, unfortunately, you know.
So any other questions before we start to bring it to a close? So I'll just repeat the question. Do modern day religious leaders have positive, negative, indifferent reactions to your teachings, your books? I was curious too, like how are you received at the old halls?
Well, it's really interesting. There are people who are deeply threatened by it. And again, use that word going back to Apocrypha, right, of doubtful authenticity. So they sort of dismiss and disparage the Gospel of Mary because it ultimately wasn't codified in the New Testament, like starting in the 4th century. So there's often this sort of knee-jerk reaction of feeling threatened and to discount me, like as a scholar. Which is interesting. And then there's others who are incredibly supportive. And, you know, there's a good example recently with my new book, Kirkus, which is like a huge review, right? Like pretty well respected. There's Kirkus and there's Publishers Weekly, right? That like do write-ups. And Kirkus was like, we need more books about Thekla. Like we need to hear about Thekla and who she was, but this is not real theology, you know, and like totally tore into my book. And then
based on what tore into it? Why?
So the main criticisms that I typically get is that because I include my personal story in my writing,
which makes the books amazing, by the way. It reads like a novel. Like it's so human and emotional, and you are a mystic and a teacher. Like you can feel the transmission coming through your stories, like any good spiritual teacher. And so I really appreciate your story.
But it's also that comment, this is not real theology, that's part of the point that I'm trying to make. The field of theology has been dominated by men since its creation. So for me, telling the truth about our lives is liturgy. That is liturgical. That is the way we worship, is we come together and we tell the truth about our lives. We talk about, oh, this is how I encountered something sacred, or this is how I finally overcame, you know, something that was tormenting me. To me, it's liturgical, so it's so important, you know, to include that. But then Publishers Weekly was like, this is, you know, a book that's taking a stand at creatively looking at the way that you know, the church has these power paradigms that we've outlived and are outdated, and we need to, you know, look into all of this. I mean, if we had an institution right now in 2025 that was created only by men, only by people in positions of power, we would really question it, right? I mean, we would, but this is nothing I have found out. Like, this is nothing that isn't known by everyone. Like, I said things.
What isn't known by everyone?
That all these scriptures existed, that contained proof, evidence that women were in positions of spiritual authority from the very beginning. That Christ and these little groups, you know, of followers, they called themselves the Way, the brothers and the sisters, the anointed ones. They were these small groups meeting. They had to meet in small groups, otherwise the Roman Empire would kill them, because they did not believe that Caesar was ultimate. They believed God was. So they would be killed if they were found. So they would meet in these small groups, and ultimately they're saying that this is a reclamation of the fact that the true power is within us, right? Isn't in these unjust power structures. And this is something that everyone who goes to seminary is taught. I mean, the information is there if you want to find it.
What are you taught at seminary? All the Gospels.
Well, okay, so it's harder to find the classes about the scriptures that are considered Gnostic. It's harder to find those classes, but they are offered. But what I'm saying is that everyone is taught the codification of the New Testament. Everyone is taught that it was a process of eliminating certain scriptures and then, delineating the ones that would be labeled Orthodox. Everyone knows that didn't happen till the 4th century.
Do you think there are more out there, buried somewhere in Egypt?
I hope so. Yeah. Or they've been found and they're hidden in the Vatican. Unsure.
Oh, do you know Brian Marescu?
No.
So Brian Marescu, I've only met him once, but he wrote The Immortality Key.
Oh, okay. I have heard of that.
It inspired a pilgrimage that I went on in Greece, where we went to Crete, which was a matriarchal society, went to Eleusis, which was named the spiritual capital of Europe because it's 45 minutes outside of Athens, and women were serving medicines there. They were serving the precursor to LSD, they were serving ergot and some sort of a wine that had psilocybin in it. And so they were basically serving the Eucharist, the body and blood of Christ, and people having their own visceral experience of the divine. So I went to Eleusis, Crete, and Delphi, right, where the oracles of Delphi were, where they were like smelling the vapors and going into altered states and advising the kings and the generals. And it's like this older version of the feminine advising council that I think we really again lost, because if we don't ever see the feminine as divine, then why would we seek its counsel in the human form? And we're seeing this play out in a really, I think, sort of intense and potentially dangerous way in the government right now. And so I think that's why these stories really, really matter. So I know that Brian Marescu is interested in learning more about this, but he gained access to the private Vatican library and spent 10 years getting access to the private papal library in order to, like, quote unquote, prove, like, to your point of, like, he had so much documented evidence from the Vatican and the private papal library that even though he was saying audacious things about women serving psychedelics as the precursor to Paleo-Christianity and the thing that formed Paleo-Christianity and even Catholicism is radical. And he's sort of single-handedly responsible for this, not single-handedly, I'd say played a large role in the psychedelic renaissance that is happening, and he himself is sober. So I'll introduce you guys. I think you'd have a fascinating conversation. So any other questions before we start to bring it to a close?
When did she become a saint?
Mary Magdalene or Thekla?
Mary Magdalene.
I don't know the exact date.
So when did Mary Magdalene
What
become
I
a
do
saint?
know is that she was officially referred to as the penitent prostitute in the 6th century.
What does penitent mean?
It means like bowing down, like she's remorseful, like
I'm so
penance.
sorry.
Yeah,
I'm so
like
sorry.
the penitent prostitute. She who is loved much is forgiven much, that idea. That happened in the 6th century when she was named the penitent prostitute. And then Pope Francis rehabilitated her name from the penitent prostitute in 2016, I believe, to the apostle to the apostles. But she's still not officially an apostle herself.
The apostle to the apostle.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, it's basically like a creative way for them to make her the apostles' mascot, without giving her like the actual, because she was the first to see the risen Christ.
Okay, she was there at the resurrection.
And then told the others, so she's the apostle to the apostles. And, for me, she just happened to be there, right time, right place situation. She was there because she was the one who could perceive him, because she was the one who had clarified her heart in order to see him,
And likely priestessing him, but we'll...
That'll
be my podcast later. When I talk about all of the potential theories.
Right.
Oh, Meggan, this has been such an outrageous delight.
You.
I'm so excited to know you. I'm so grateful for the amount of research that you've done.
Thank you.
And for your creativity and your openness. Is there anything that you wish that I had asked you?
No, I feel really full.
Great. So
and on fire.
So let's just close it with a little a little intention setting. So I invite you, if you're in the room, if you're listening at home, to close your eyes. Take a big, deep breath into your heart, in through your nose. Taking another sip of air at the top. Really bringing your awareness even deeper into the inner chamber of your heart and exhaling on a hum. Another beautiful, big breath into your heart. At the top of the inhale, taking another sip of air. Seeing if you can bring that awareness, that energy, that life force into this frequency of pure unconditional love. And as you exhale, exhaling on a hum. Third and final one, breathing in the frequency of unconditional love into your heart through your nose. At the top of the inhale, breathing in more, feeling the size, frequency, and amplitude of your heart increase. And as you exhale, sending love to every single cell in your body, sending some love to the whole planet. Just sending some gratitude to Meggan for taking us to church, not the one with pews and stained windows, but the church that lives inside our bones, inside our hearts. Imagining a planet where each of us has a sense of agency, feels the importance of feeling our own feelings, and remembers how to hear the voice of the divine inside of our own hearts. And whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes. And I want to say thank you for joining us for this episode of Why Isn't Everyone Doing This? If you enjoyed it, if you learned something, you can tag us, you can let us know what you learned. And I would invite you to share this media as medicine. This is how we get these messages around. If you've fallen in love with Meggan, she's on social media. What's your handle?
Meggan Watterson.
At Meggan Watterson,
Yeah.
2 G's.
2 T's.
2 T's. And her new book, The Girl Who Baptized Herself, is either out or coming out, because I don't know when this will come out. But you can always pre-order it. And thank you so much for joining us. And we'll see you next week on Why Isn't Everyone Doing This?